December 2013, Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Nathaniel Sterling was known for two things. He was very smart in math, and he liked to make people feel silly if they didn't know as much as him. His students were scared of him, and his fellow teachers thought he was amazing. But there was one thing he really didn't like: when people who weren't professors or students acted like they could understand math. So, when a man in a worn leather jacket walked into the back of his classroom, Sterling raised an eyebrow. The students gasped and whispered. Even if someone didn't watch movies, they knew this man. It was Keanu Reeves. Yes, the famous Keanu Reeves. Sterling smirked. Well, a celebrity. Are you here to sign autographs or actually learn something? He asked. The students giggled. They could feel something exciting was about to happen. Keanu smiled kindly. I just love math, he said. Sterling laughed inside. He had met actors before. They were good at talking, but when it came to hard subjects like math, they always got confused. He wanted to prove that Keanu didn't belong in his class. All right, Mr. Reeves, Sterling said, turning to the whiteboard. He wrote a really hard math problem. Even his smartest students would struggle to solve it. If you love math so much, why don't you solve this? Sterling said in a voice full of pride. The room went silent. The students exchanged nervous glances. No one ever dared to challenge Professor Sterling because they knew he would make them look silly. Keanu stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked calmly to the board. Sterling crossed his arms, ready to watch Keanu stutter, hesitate, and fail. But something surprising happened. Keanu looked at the problem for just 5 seconds. Then he started writing. His hand moved fast, smoothly, without stopping. He didn't look confused. He didn't make mistakes. Step by step, he solved the problem. And just like that, the answer was there, clear and correct. The room was completely silent. Everyone held their breath. Sterling's smile disappeared. He looked at the board, checking for mistakes. But there were none. The answer was perfect. A student whispered, "How did he do that so fast?" Another student gasped. "That's genius-level thinking." Keanu put the marker down and turned to Sterling. His face was calm. "I just love math," he said again softly. Sterling opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. For the first time in his life, he was completely speechless. The students looked at him, waiting to see what he would do. This was the man who always made others feel small, but now an actor had outsmarted him. Who really was Keanu Reeves? Not many people knew that before acting, before all the movies and fame, Keanu had dreamed of being a scientist. As a teenager, he loved solving math problems for fun. He could remember numbers and equations almost perfectly. And now, he had just shown everyone that being smart doesn't mean you have to be a professor or have a fancy degree. The silence stretched. Sterling's hands were clenched into fists. He wanted to say something, to take back control. But what could he say? The answer on the board was correct. Keanu had solved it like it was the easiest thing in the world. The students began whispering. Some were smiling, others typing quickly on their phones. They were probably messaging their friends. "You won't believe what just happened in class." Then Keanu leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm but had deep meaning. "Professor," he said, "math isn't about making people feel bad. It's about discovering new things, about connection, about the beauty of patterns and logic. You love math, don't you?" Sterling stiffened. "Of course I do," he snapped. Keanu nodded slowly. "Then why use it to make people feel small instead of lifting them up?" The students were frozen. This wasn't just a math lesson anymore. It was something bigger, something more important. For the first time, Sterling looked unsure of himself. His confidence was cracking. But he wasn't ready to admit it yet. "You think you know more than me, Mr. Reeves?" he asked in a quiet voice. Keanu shook his head. "No," he said. "I think I know something different. And the best thing about learning? It never stops." Sterling opened his mouth again but still couldn't find the words. He had always believed he was the smartest person in the room. But now he wasn't so sure. Keanu picked up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out of the classroom. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then the students broke into excited whispers, some shaking their heads in amazement, others grinning. They had just witnessed something they would never forget. But the story didn't end there. Later that night, as the sun set over Harvard University, Professor Sterling sat alone in his office, staring at a blank notebook page. His mind replayed what had happened in class. The way Keanu had solved that problem so easily. The words he had said. Why use it to tear people down instead of lifting them up? Sterling sighed and rubbed his temple. He had spent his whole life being the smartest person in the room. But for the first time in years, he wondered if he had been wise. Almost without thinking, he picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he typed. Keanu Reeves mathematics background. A few articles popped up. At first he skimmed them just to see. But then his eyes widened. Keanu had been really good at math as a teenager. He had once thought about studying physics. He could remember numbers like a camera taking a picture. And even though he was famous and rich, he still studied math just for fun. Sterling leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Maybe, just maybe, Keanu had taught him something that day. As he sat there, staring at his computer screen, Sterling's mind drifted back to his own childhood. He had once loved math the way Keanu did, not as a weapon to show his superiority, but as a beautiful puzzle waiting to be solved. Somewhere along the way he had lost that joy. He had turned math into something scary instead of something wonderful. He glanced at the whiteboard in his office, filled with complex equations. For the first time in years he didn't feel proud looking at them. He felt empty. Then, slowly he picked up a marker. He erased the intimidating formulas and wrote something different. A simple math puzzle, the kind that made him excited when he was young. And as he stared at it, something inside him shifted. A small smile appeared on his face. The next morning, when his students entered the classroom, they expected to see the usual Sterling, the strict, no-nonsense professor. But something was different. He greeted them warmly. He asked them questions not to test them but to encourage them. The students noticed the change and whispers spread quickly. Professor Sterling had changed. And in the back of the classroom, unknown to anyone, Keanu Reeves had left behind something far more important than just a solved equation. He had reminded a man of why he fell in love with math in the first place. Sterling leaned back in his chair, looking up at the ceiling. What just happened today? A student might have embarrassed him. A student might have made fun of him. But Keanu did not do that. Instead, he did something different. He showed Sterling something surprising. He gave him a lesson like a mirror showing him who he really was. It made Sterling wonder, could he change? Or would he forget about this just like an old math problem in a dusty book? Or maybe, like a student who finds a hard problem, he would finally try to solve it step by step. The night was long. Sterling sat in his office. His desk lamp flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. He tapped his pen on the wooden desk, deep in thought. He kept thinking about that moment, Keanu standing in front of the class, solving the problem so easily. His calm voice, his kind but strong eyes. Sterling had never felt like this before. He had always made sure he was the smartest person in the room. No one questioned him. No one challenged him. But today an actor, someone he thought would not understand math, had left him speechless. Sterling's pride told him to forget about it. But something deep inside told him not to. Outside, students walked and talked, enjoying their night. But Sterling just sat there thinking about everything. He took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. Then he reached for his phone. He hesitated, his fingers floating above the keyboard. Just searching for Keanu's name felt like admitting something. But curiosity won. He typed, Keanu Reeves' childhood. He scrolled and read. Keanu had moved from city to city as a child, never having a steady home. His father left when he was young. He struggled in school not because he wasn't smart but because he had dyslexia. This made reading and learning difficult. But then, Sterling read something that surprised him. Keanu once dreamed of being a scientist. He loved numbers and equations. But life took him in another direction. He became an actor. Even though he was famous, he never lost his love for math. Sterling felt a lump in his throat. He had spent years looking down on students who weren't good at school. He thought being smart was a way to prove he was better. But Keanu? He walked into the classroom with no pride, no arrogance, just love for math. And Sterling had tried to embarrass him for it. The thought felt heavy in his chest. Sterling leaned back in his chair again, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the teacher. He felt like a student. The next morning, as the sun rose over Harvard's buildings, Sterling made a decision. He had to find Keanu. But as he packed his things and got ready, he didn't know that Keanu had already left. He had come for just one class, a brief moment, and now he was gone, like a whisper in the wind. But something inside Sterling told him this wasn't the end. Just like math problems always have answers, life had a way of bringing people together when the time was right. Would they meet again? Would Sterling get a chance to say what he needed to say? Or would this question stay in his mind forever, never solved? Days passed, but Sterling couldn't stop thinking about that moment. No matter how many math problems he wrote or how many students he taught, something pressed on his heart. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, regret. He had always believed being smart was something to measure, something that made people more important. But in just one moment, Keanu had changed everything he believed. Sterling searched everywhere, but Keanu was gone. No one knew if he would return. It left Sterling feeling empty, like an unfinished math problem without an answer. Then, something unexpected happened. One evening, Sterling was walking through the campus library, lost in thought. Suddenly, a voice called out behind him. A calm, familiar voice. "Professor." Sterling turned quickly. There he was, Keanu Reeves. He stood near the bookshelves, wearing the same old leather jacket, holding a book in his hand. He wasn't flashy, but his presence filled the room. Sterling's heart pounded. You came back," he said, almost breathless. Keanu gave a small smile. "I never really left," he said. "I just wanted to see if you were still thinking about it." Sterling swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. Keanu stepped closer, looking at Sterling with kind eyes. "You were looking for me, weren't you?" he asked. Sterling nodded slowly. "Yes. I want to say sorry." The words felt strange to him. He wasn't used to admitting when he was wrong, but right now nothing else mattered. Keanu looked at him for a moment, then pointed to an empty table. "Sit with me." Sterling hesitated, but then he sat down, feeling nervous like a student about to take a big test. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Keanu slid a book across the table. Sterling looked at it. The cover said, "The Beauty of Mathematics." Keanu tapped the book lightly. "When I was young, I loved math. Not because of grades or awards, but because it felt like poetry. Numbers help us understand the world, don't they?" Sterling nodded. "Yes, but I think I forgot that along the way." Keanu's eyes were gentle. "That happens. The world makes us think being smart is about winning. But real wisdom isn't about proving others wrong. It's about understanding." Sterling felt something change inside him. He had spent years teaching students, but had he ever really listened to them? Keanu leaned back in his chair. "I didn't come to your class to show off. I came because I love learning." Sterling took a deep breath. "And I tried to take that away from you." Keanu shook his head. "No. You just reminded me why I love it in the first place." The words hit Sterling deeply. For years he thought knowledge was about being the smartest in the room. But Keanu, a man the world knew for acting in movies, had shown him something different. Sterling sat back thinking. This conversation was changing something inside him. He didn't know where it would lead. Keanu stood up, putting his hands in his pockets. "I have to go." Sterling felt a little panicked. "Will I see you again?" Keanu gave a small smile. "Maybe. Maybe not. But the real question is, what will you do with what you've learned?" And with that, he walked away, disappearing into the dim light of the library, leaving Sterling alone with his thoughts. Professor Sterling sat in the library for a long time. His mind was full. His heart was heavy. For years, he had been proud of his intelligence, but he had missed something simple and important. Keanu's words stayed in his mind. "What will you do with what you've learned?" For the first time in his life, Sterling didn't know the answer. Days passed, then weeks, but he couldn't stop thinking about that moment. He felt regret, like a mistake he couldn't fix. He thought about Keanu, his kindness, his love for learning, his humility even when others laughed at him. One evening, sitting in his office, Sterling made a choice. He took out a piece of paper, took a deep breath, and started to write. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I never thought you would change my life, but you did." He poured his feelings into the letter. He wrote about his arrogance, his regrets, and how Keanu had opened his eyes. He wrote about how, for years, he had used math to show power instead of its beauty. Keanu had reminded him what math truly was. He finished the letter, sealed it, and sent it to an address he had found. He didn't expect a reply, but he knew he had to send it. Months passed. Sterling changed. His students noticed. He no longer used math to make others feel small. Instead, he inspired them. He smiled more. He encouraged questions instead of ignoring them. His lessons were no longer just about numbers. They became stories, connections, moments of discovery. Then one evening, as he walked home through the chilly Boston air, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Professor Sterling?" The voice was calm, familiar. Sterling's heart pounded. "Keanu?" A soft chuckle. "I got your letter." Sterling took a shaky breath. "I meant every word." "I know," Keanu said. Pause. "I just wanted to say thank you." Sterling felt something inside him break. Years of pride, regret, all the things he had never known how to say before. "No," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "Thank you." There was silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of change, of something deep and real. For the first time in his life, Professor Sterling felt something new. The lesson wasn't in the numbers. It was in the people. As the call ended, he stood under the streetlights and smiled quietly. Some lessons stay with you forever. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.